Good morning. Today we're going to take 10 minutes or so to go through completing a figured bass exercise, much like one you may encounter in the AP Music Theory exam. As you can see from the screen, you will be given approximately this many chords. In this case, you really only have 6 or 7 chords to fill out. The first one is filled out for you, and that is to give you a context from which you can proceed with logical voice leading. Then the bass line is given along with its figured bass. The purpose of this exercise is twofold. Number one, can you read a figured bass? Do you know what it means and can you realize it? And number two, in the realization of the figured bass, can you maintain good voice leading procedures? The first thing we look at is the bass line. It extends from F sharp up by step to the dominant and then leaps to F sharp in the next octave. You have a chart below the figured bass, which you will not have on the AP exam, but I've been giving that to you to get you in the habit of making sure that you have all the chord members present. I've also filled out the first one simply because you need to pay attention to what's in the first chord in order to have your voice leading move correctly to the second chord. The bass note of the second chord is G sharp. The figured bass says sharp 6, 5. The 6, 5 tells us this is a first inversion chord, and the sharp, which could also be represented by a 6 with a diagonal slash, tells us that the 6th note above the bass needs to be sharped or raised 1/2 step. Why? 6 above G sharp is E, and E is the leading tone in this key, so we must use E sharp with the leading tone 7th chord. So after placing the G sharp down here, I can add the root, which is E sharp, B, and the 7th, which is D. The next chord is an A in the bass. This again is the third of the chord because the figured bass is 6, meaning first inversion. So we need to place down here F sharp, A, C sharp. The fourth chord, which has a B in the bass, is again a 6, 5 chord. This means it's going to be a 7th chord in first inversion. The root of this chord is the third below the B, G sharp, and then we just need to add the D and the F sharp. In the last measure, we have a C sharp on the first beat in a half note, and there are 2 sets of figured bass notations underneath it. This is a cadential 6/4 progression. This is a progression that still is troublesome for some of you. It really is very simple if you pay attention to the figured bass. The 8 tells you that you're going to have to double or add another 8. It's not often listed. It's only listed if you're going to be moving that 8 to a 7. But the 8 is always going to be present above the bass because in this chord we always double the bass. The 6 says that we need a 6th above the bass, which is A, and the 4 says we need a 4 above the bass, which is F sharp. The figured bass tells me exactly how the voice leading is going to move to get to the next beat. The 8 above the bass, or C sharp, is going to descend by step to B. The 6 above the bass, or A, is going to descend by step to G sharp. And the 4 above the bass, or F sharp, is going to descend to E sharp. Again, this must be E sharp because this is the leading tone. And then on the final chord, we resolve the dominant 7th chord. Your next step is to fill in the bass the Roman numerals if you haven't already done so. Lowercase 1, lowercase 7 with a degree sign. The degree sign means a fully diminished 7th chord. These stacked thirds are all minor thirds. Lowercase 1, lowercase 2 with a slashed degree sign. The slashed degree sign reminds you that this is a half diminished chord, half diminished seventh chord. In other words, the triad G sharp, B, D is a diminished triad, but the interval from G sharp to F sharp is a minor third. You could also look at this chord as stacked thirds. From G sharp to B is a minor third, from B to D is a minor third, but from D to F sharp is a major third. The first two chords in the last measure fall under the Roman numeral 5. You can either repeat the Roman numeral 5, note that it's uppercase because this is major. You can either repeat it for the second chord, or you can do as I've done, just write a line showing that the figured bass refers to an enhanced or elaborated 5 chord that takes up 2 beats. And then, of course, the final chord is Roman numeral 1, lowercase. Now we simply go about filling in the pitches. We move always to the closest pitch available. So, from C sharp, we move to D, which its closest neighbor is C sharp. Its closest neighbor is D again, which descends to C sharp, progresses down to B. That's the 8/7 that you see down here in the figured bass, and ends on A. We then move on to the alto. Whoops, that just changed to alto. We don't want it being alto, we want it being soprano. We next move on to the alto. We're already given the F sharp in the first measure, the first beat of the first measure. Its closest neighbor in the next beat is E sharp, which, as a leading tone does, must resolve to F sharp. That F sharp is held as a common tone in the fourth beat, and again as a common tone on the first beat of the next measure. On this beat, it is the fourth above the bass, and we know from the figured bass that it must go down to the third above the bass, which is E sharp. And then that resolves to the tonic F sharp. And finally, we do the tenor. Here we are missing the B, so we add the B, which then descends to A. Here it descends to G sharp. The G sharp moves to an A, which is the sixth above the bass. As the figured bass tells us, sixth above the bass must go to the fifth above the bass, and this finally descends to F sharp. Notice that the final chord has 3 roots. We have a tripled root, no fifth, and the third. This is a fairly normal outcome when you have all 4 voices in the dominant 7th chord immediately preceding. For today, you have a similar exercise to do. Your challenge is to do it in 10 minutes or less. Good luck.